ADX Florence, The Hell Within, America's Most Punishing Prison, true crime documentary. It started with a scream, not from fear, but from pain. Deep inside the cold concrete walls of ADX Florence, the most secure prison in the United States, guards rushed down a long, echoing hallway. Their boots slammed against the steel floor as the sound of alarms filled the air. A prisoner had been caught trying to escape. He had spent months planning it. Using a small piece of metal he'd hidden from the meal trays, he'd scraped at a window screw so tiny most wouldn't notice it. He thought he could break free, maybe reach the outside yard, maybe climb the razor wire fence that surrounded the prison like a cage inside a cage. But inside ADX Florence, there are no real chances to escape. Cameras watch every corner, doors open only by control rooms, and even the air vents are designed to keep you locked in. The moment the sensors detected his movement, red lights flashed and steel doors slammed shut across the block. Within seconds, the guards were there. They found him halfway through his plan, trembling, sweating, still holding the sharp piece of metal. They ordered him to stop, but he didn't listen. He ran, screaming for freedom he'd never have. Then came the sound of rubber bullets and the blast of pepper spray. When they dragged him out, coughing and bleeding, the other inmates watched silently through the tiny windows in their cell doors. They knew what would happen next. Punishment. Real punishment. Inside ADX Florence, there's a place known among inmates as the hole beneath the hole. It's a punishment cell used for those who break rules or try to escape. There's no window, no sound, no one to talk to, only a concrete bed, a toilet, and a camera staring back at you.
The man was stripped of his clothes, given only a thin jumpsuit, and locked inside. No visits, no light, no voice, just silence. He spent days there, maybe weeks. No one knew for sure. When he came back to his regular cell, his eyes looked empty, like he left a part of himself behind in that dark room. At ADX Florence, this is how they control the most dangerous men in America, not with pain, but with isolation. Most prisoners here never touch another human being. They eat alone, shower alone, exercise alone, in small concrete yards the size of a garage. Even when they're moved, they're shackled from head to toe. Guards call it full restraint mode. There are no fights here, no riots, no shouting, just silence, endless silence. For men who once lived wild, violent lives, silence becomes the worst punishment of all. But some can't take it. They start shouting through the cracks of their cell doors, banging on the walls, talking to themselves for hours. Others lose their minds quietly. The doctors call it isolation psychosis. One former guard once said, "It's not a prison, it's a clean version of hell." Still, every once in a while, someone tries. Someone decides they'll find a way out, no matter what. There was another case, a prisoner who thought he could dig through the floor using metal from his bed frame. He worked on it for months, covering the marks with toothpaste so the guards wouldn't notice during inspection. But one morning, during routine checks, they found the tiny crack beneath his toilet. That's when they moved him, not to another cell, but to total isolation. No books, no radio, no human voice for weeks. When the lights go off in ADX Florence, the silence becomes something else. A pressure, heavy and alive. You can almost hear your own heartbeat echo off the walls. And for the men trapped inside, that silence is the real punishment. Every attempt to escape ends the same way: pain, restraint, and weeks of darkness. But the question remains, how did it get this bad? How did the US government build a prison so secure and so cruel that it breaks even the strongest minds? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, to why ADX Florence was built in the first place, and what kind of men it was made to hold. What you're about to hear next will reveal how America's prison for the worst of the worst came to exist, and why it was designed not just to hold prisoners, but to destroy them. It began long before the walls of ADX Florence were ever built, long before the world called it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In the 1980s, American prisons were out of control. Riots broke out across the country. Inmates attacked guards, set fires, and even took hostages. Some prisons were so violent that officers refused to enter without full riot gear. The worst of them all was the Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois. It was supposed to be the highest security prison in the country until October 22, 1983. That morning, two guards, Thomas Klutz and Merle Clavel, were stabbed to death in separate attacks only hours apart. The killers were inmates linked to powerful gangs, men who controlled others through fear, money, and murder. After that day, the government realized something. No prison in America could control these kinds of men. So they decided to build one that could. In 1994, deep in the quiet mountains of Colorado, construction began on a place that would become known as ADX Florence, the Administrative Maximum Facility. It was designed to be escape-proof, riot-proof, and rebellion-proof, a place where the most dangerous criminals in America could be kept away from everyone else, even from each other. Every cell was made of solid concrete. The doors had electronic locks controlled from a central room. The windows were narrow slits built at angles so prisoners couldn't even see the sky. Even the air was controlled, filtered, and sealed. There was no smell of outside life, no fresh breeze, no sound of birds, just the endless hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of your own breathing. One prison official said proudly, "At ADX, no one escapes, not physically, not mentally, not spiritually." The men who arrived here were the most feared in America: terrorists, drug lords, and violent gang leaders. Among them were Ted Kaczynski, the unbomber, Ramzi Youssef, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber, Terry Nichols, Oklahoma City bombing, and later El Chapo, the Mexican drug kingpin who had escaped prisons before. But here, there was no escape. Each man lived inside a concrete box, 7 by 12 feet, smaller than an average bathroom. They had a bed, a sink, a toilet, and a slot in the door for food trays. Everything else was taken away. For 1 hour each day, they were allowed outside, not into open air, but into a small fenced-in space known as the dog run. It looked more like an empty cage than a yard. There, they could see the sun for a few minutes before being led back inside. Even guards followed strict rules. They couldn't talk casually with inmates. They couldn't touch them. Every movement was watched by cameras, every step controlled by security systems.
ADX Florence was made to eliminate human contact, and that's what made it work. But over time, something else started happening inside those walls. Men began to lose their minds. Some prisoners started harming themselves, scratching their skin, banging their heads against the wall, talking to voices that didn't exist. Others went completely silent. The US government called it administrative control. Psychologists called it slow mental death. In 2012, a lawsuit exposed what was happening behind the steel doors. Prisoners with serious mental illnesses were being kept in isolation for years. They heard voices, saw things, and begged for help. Some tried to end their own lives. The court records described it in one chilling phrase: "They are buried alive." But the government defended the prison. They said ADX Florence was necessary, that it kept Americans safe from the worst of the worst. Still, not everyone inside was a terrorist or murderer. Some inmates had simply attacked guards, joined riots, or tried to escape from other prisons. Once you earned that label, too dangerous, you were sent here. That's how escape attempts became the ultimate crime. In 2009, A prisoner named Richard Lee McNair, who had escaped from multiple prisons before, was brought to ADX. He'd once mailed himself out of a prison inside a crate of mail bags. Now at Florence, there was no mailroom work, no weak walls, no chance to even dream of running. He told reporters later, "In here, you don't even think about freedom. You just try to keep your mind from disappearing." And yet, every now and then, one prisoner tries. The punishment is always the same: total isolation, 24 hours a day, no visits, no TV, no books, no contact. Just the sound of your own heart echoing off the concrete. One guard once said, "If you even whisper the word escape, you'll never see daylight again." But punishment inside ADX Florence isn't just for escape attempts. It's for disobedience of any kind. If a prisoner talks back to a guard, refuses an order, or even throws a tray of food, he can lose all privileges, including phone calls, exercise time, and contact with his family. Weeks can turn into months. And if they resist, they're met by the Special Operations Response Team, dressed in black armor, shields in hand, ready to pin a man to the floor in seconds. It's control through fear, punishment through silence.
By the mid-2000s, human rights organizations began calling ADX Florence a place that should not exist in a civilized nation. Still, the government stands firm. No one has ever escaped, and no one ever will. But inside those walls, something even darker was happening. A battle between control and madness. Because while the guards believed they had built a perfect machine to hold dangerous men, they soon realized something terrifying. The human mind can only take so much. And when it breaks, even the strongest prison in the world can't contain what comes next. It started with a sound that no one expected to hear inside ADX Florence, a human scream. The prison was always silent. You could walk the long gray corridors and hear nothing but the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But one morning, that silence broke. A guard on night shift heard shouting from cell B203. The voice was loud, wild, and desperate. When the officers reached the cell, they saw blood on the walls. The prisoner inside had cut himself with a piece of metal he'd torn from his light fixture. His arms were shaking, his voice hoarse. He kept yelling the same words over and over again. "Let me out. Let me out. Please." He wasn't trying to escape the prison. He was trying to escape his own mind. This was the side of ADX Florence that the public never saw. On paper, it was a Supermax facility built for safety, but inside, it had become something far darker. A place where silence and isolation turned men into ghosts. Guards moved carefully through the unit that morning. Each wore black armor and visors to shield their faces. They called the cell block Range 13, the place where prisoners who'd broken rules or tried to escape were kept. Here, punishment was pure isolation. No sound, no color, no time. Just endless concrete and your own thoughts. The prisoner's name was Robert Hood, a man who had once attacked officers in another prison. Now he sat alone for years, surrounded by gray walls and memories that refused to fade. He tried to stay calm at first, reading, counting days, reciting old songs in his head. But after so long, something inside him broke. He said later in a rare letter to the court, "In this place, your mind leaves before your body does." ADX Florence was built to stop violence, but the more they tried to control it, the more it grew from the inside. Some prisoners started talking to the walls, convinced that other inmates were whispering through the vents. Others refused food, believing it was poisoned. One man screamed for days, begging for a doctor. When none came, he stopped screaming and never spoke again. The guards called it going to the deep end. But the worst came when one prisoner decided he'd rather die than live one more day in silence.
His name was Jose Vega, a former gang member who had tried to escape another federal prison years earlier. At ADX, he spent most of his time staring at the ceiling, counting every crack. The day he snapped, he used his bedsheet to hang himself from the light fixture. The guards found him during their morning rounds. His death shocked no one inside the prison. It was just another day in a place where time stood still. Still, each incident was a reminder that ADX Florence's power came at a terrible cost. When investigators visited, they asked guards how they handled the stress of working there. One of them said quietly, "You don't. You just stop feeling. Same as them." Punishment wasn't only for the inmates. It touched everyone inside those walls. But what truly made ADX Florence infamous wasn't the suicides or the screams. It was what happened to those who still tried to fight the system, the ones who refused to be broken. One of them was Thomas Silverstein, a man once called America's most dangerous prisoner. He had spent more than 35 years in solitary confinement, locked away after killing a guard during a prison riot. Silverstein was moved to ADX Florence after it opened. His cell was built deeper, colder, and more isolated than any other. He was forbidden to talk to anyone. For decades, he never touched another human being. In his letters, he wrote, "The silence here is so loud it hurts. You forget what voices sound like. You forget what you look like." He tried to stay sane by drawing on scraps of paper and talking to insects that crawled through cracks, but the silence always returned. When he died in 2019, some said his death was the final proof that ADX Florence wasn't a prison. It was a slow execution chamber. Even now, the system stands by it. Officials say ADX keeps America safe, that it's the only place that can contain men who would kill without hesitation. But those who have been inside know the truth. At Florence, punishment doesn't end when you stop fighting. It continues every minute, every second, every heartbeat. The lights never go off completely. The cameras never blink. The walls never answer back. A former warden once described it best. It's not about security anymore. It's about control. Total control. And for the men locked inside, that control becomes their world, until they no longer remember what the outside even looks like. No one has ever escaped ADX Florence. But for many who enter, escaping isn't about breaking through walls, it's about surviving their own mind.
Inside these concrete cells, America hides its darkest secret. That the greatest punishment isn't death or pain, it's being forgotten. And as night falls over the Rockies, behind the steel doors and endless silence, the prison remains awake. A living reminder that sometimes hell isn't below us. It's right here on Earth, sealed behind walls the world was never meant to see. The storm outside was heavy that night. Thunder rolled over the Colorado mountains, echoing through the valleys around ADX Florence, America's most secure and most feared prison. Inside, the power flickered for just a second, a rare thing in a place built to never fail. But even that moment of darkness sent chills through the corridors. For the inmates locked in their concrete boxes, it was a taste of something they hadn't seen in years, real darkness. One of the guards on duty that night, a man named Officer Daniels, later said, "When the lights went out, you could almost feel every prisoner hold his breath. It was like the whole place woke up." For a few seconds, the silence broke. Inmates started banging on their doors, shouting through the vents, their voices rising like thunder. Some laughed, others screamed. It was chaos, something ADX hadn't seen in years. But then, the lights came back on, and everything stopped. The guards moved quickly through the range, checking every cell, making sure no one had used the brief blackout to plan something. But in ADX Florence, planning an escape is impossible. Every door is controlled electronically. Every camera runs on backup power. Every corner is built to trap you. Still, the blackout reminded the staff of something they all tried to forget. Nothing is unbreakable.
One inmate in Range 12 had been quietly working on a way to test that. His name was David Hammer, a convicted murderer who once shared death row with Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. Hammer had already spent years in isolation and believed that ADX was a place where, as he once wrote, they don't bury you in the ground, they bury you in time. He'd watched guards, memorized patterns, and waited for any weakness. The power flicker gave Hammer hope, a sign that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. But hope is dangerous inside ADX. A few days later, officers found something strange during a cell inspection. A thin wire hidden behind a vent connected to a small piece of metal, sharpened to a point. It wasn't enough to escape, but enough to make the staff tighten control once again. Hammer was moved to the Black Range, a row of punishment cells used for the most extreme cases. There, the lights never turn off. The temperature drops to near freezing. Meals are smaller. Privilege is gone.
It's said that men who go there never come back the same. That week, Hammer stopped eating. He refused his medication, refused to speak. When a psychologist came to see him through the slot in his door, he whispered, "This place isn't made to keep us in. It's made to erase us." And in a way, he was right. ADX Florence wasn't built just to hold men. It was built to control minds, to make sure no one could resist, rebel, or even dream of freedom again. Guards, psychologists, and wardens have said the same thing in private. The punishment here isn't physical, it's mental. The cells are clean, the routines are strict, but behind every inch of concrete lies a quiet truth. ADX Florence is not about rehabilitation. It's about removal. Removal from the world, from human contact, from yourself. When prisoners write letters to the outside, most never get replies. Some have been forgotten by their families. Others don't even know if their families are alive. One inmate once wrote, "You stop counting days because days don't mean anything here. You start counting memories until you run out." As years passed, the stories of ADX Florence spread beyond the prison walls. Human rights groups demanded its closure. Former guards confessed to nightmares. Psychologists called it a place that drives sanity to its knees. Yet the government still stands by it. To them, ADX Florence is a necessary evil, the final answer for America's most dangerous men.
And maybe that's true. Maybe the world needs a place to hold those who cannot be trusted with freedom. But as you look deeper, the line between justice and cruelty starts to blur. Because when punishment becomes isolation, and isolation becomes torture, we have to ask, at what point does a prison stop protecting us and start destroying them? As the storm cleared that night, the prison fell back into silence. The mountains stood tall, the stars hidden behind clouds. Inside, the lights glowed pale and constant, reflecting off walls that had seen too much. In cell D214, the same man who once screamed for freedom now sat still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The noise, the fear, the anger, all gone. Just emptiness. That's how ADX Florence wins. Not with chains, not with pain, but with silence so deep, it becomes part of you. And as morning came, the guards began another routine check, another day inside the most punishing prison in America. Behind every door, another story waited, another voice swallowed by concrete, another man forgotten by time. The fortress still stands today, quiet and untouched, a reminder that even in the land of freedom, there's a place where freedom itself no longer exists.
This is ADX Florence, The Hell Within. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden world of American prisons, don't stop here. Subscribe to uncover more real events, real crimes, and true stories from inside the U.S. justice system. Stories the world was never meant to see. Because behind every locked door, there's a truth waiting to be told. And sometimes, the scariest prisons are the ones built for the mind.